nice to see you all today on this weird, snowy, sunny March day. We are so excited to be welcoming Nicholas Benton today, Nick Benton, for his book, Please Don't Eat Your Children. So I'm very excited to welcome both of our writers today. I'm going to introduce our conversation partner first. This is Lou Chabarro, a prize-winning reporter for the nation's oldest LGBTQ news publication, The Washington Blade. Lou Chabarro Jr. first took up his pen in 1976 under the pseudonym Lou Romano. Fast forward 4 decades, Chabarro has covered almost everything for the Blade, including the nation's political triumphs and protests, the rise of the AIDS epidemic, federal efforts to find and fire gay government employees, and towering gay civil rights figures into the late Dr. Frank Kameny. Along the way, Chabarro has earned countless honors. In 2011, Chabarro made journalism history as the first LGBT inductee into the Society of Professional Journalists Washington Pro Chapter Hall of Fame. So thank you, Lou, for joining us today.
Hello.
Yeah. Lou is going to be Nicholas's conversation partner. And now I'm going to introduce our author. Nicholas F. Benton has made significant contributions across several domains, primarily as a dedicated local journalist and as a pioneering LGBTQ+ rights activist. His most enduring legacy is the founding and stewardship of the Falls Church News Press, a model of resilient and impactful community journalism in the era of decline for print media. Benton is a published author of several books, including Extraordinary Hearts, Reclaiming Gay Sensibility's Central Role in the Progress of Civilization, and Gay Men in the Feminist Revolution, which explores the historical and cultural role of the LGBTQ+ community. So please give a warm welcome to both our authors.
All right, Lou, I guess you get to kick it off, right?
Yes, sure. Well, let's start, Nick, with getting into the top title of the book, which is certainly eye-catching. Could you tell a little bit about, you mentioned in the very beginning, one of your essays compares some of the times we're having with the Jonathan Swift,
Yes.
who talked about eating...
He wrote a very famous essay called something, I can't remember right now, a modest proposal. That's
right.
And it was about suggesting that a lot of the kids in those days who wound up on the streets of Ireland and England could be serving a more useful purpose by simply being food for the wealthy and so on and so forth. And it was a satire, of course. But on the other hand, the reality of our culture is that we too often do raise our children to be consumed whenever we say, do not eat your children. You could say, do not kill your children, do not send your children to war, do not force your children to do your bidding, to define themselves in terms of your life, and all of those things which have a very counter influence on our culture. What I reference a lot in the book is the Abraham and Isaac story from the New Testament, from the Old Testament, from the very book of Genesis, where, as you recall, Abraham is told by God to go up to this mountaintop with his oldest son, who he's taken a lot of time getting around to having in the first place, and sacrificing him, and putting his head down and chopping his head off just to show his loyalty to God. And what happens is that God decides that this is not what he wants to have happen, and instead he tells Abraham at the last minute, don't slay your son. There's a ram over there and stuck in a thicket. You go him and you sacrifice him instead. And of course that was an important moment, because the whole Abrahamic tradition of Western civilization hinges on the fact that Abraham did not kill his son, but raised his son to be a leader and to be a father of many, many great tribes that are responsible for not only Christianity and Islam and Judaism, but the whole Abrahamic cultural tradition of the West. It hinges on the idea that you are not supposed to eat your children. That's that.
Indeed. Now, another theme that runs through many of your essays in the book is cults.
Yes.
And you talk about a lot in the book, of course, about the distinguished president Trump, and that some of his administration may be cult-like, and some of that may have started in the 1970s. But could you go into that a little bit?
Yes, I did 10 episodes in the book, 10 of the essays, which are originally get published in my newspaper week to week, and then I send them off and put them in a book like this. Yes, indeed. My own experience with cults in the 1970s taught me a great deal about how they operate, and it's premised on conditioning a person to do things that are not necessarily in their own self-interest, but are at the behest of the cult leader or the cult movement. And all going right back to the 50s, you had the emergence in the intelligence community in the West of an idea about brainwashing and how it would work and how it would be successful. And I reference some of the original materials associated with that. The one thing was problem with brainwashing people is you couldn't keep them brainwashed without a hell of a lot of control over them at all times to keep them that way. And so that's when the development of cults was proliferated in the early 70s. It was a reaction against the civil rights movement, the anti-war movement of the 60s, and the women's movement and the gay liberation movement in the late 60s, as a way to counter that with creating these social entities that would be premised on, not on reality, not on science or anything like that, but a denial of those things at the behest of whatever whims or specific philosophies or worldviews that a cult would promulgate. And so the key to the cult is you've got to keep the people under the thumb. You've got to keep them under control at all times in order if you want them to carry out doing what you want them to do. And what we find in the case of Donald Trump coming up in New York and so forth, he came through that whole culture. And then in the 1980s, it's well documented actually, he went to Moscow to talk about building a hotel in Moscow in 1986. And there are reports from KGB agents, and it's been published and so on and so forth, that they determined that they were in the business of recruiting agents of influence in the West, especially in the business community. And they reported that year they found someone to be their agent of influence in the West, and that was Donald J. Trump. And going forward, he comes back, he gets a job with NBC, a sweetheart job to run this television show called The Apprentice. And it kind of goes from there. And so everything that the 1970s cult movement espoused, including the fact that you never accepted the results of an election. That was one of the things I learned from my involvement in the 1970s, is every election was fixed. And and the key to it was to simply assert it, and no matter what. And we've seen that in Trump, right? And I think we're going to see one of the more dangerous elements of that come up in this year's midterms, I'm afraid.
Yes. And do you refer to some of the Trump cabinet members? I mean, do you think that within the White House or within the administration, there's something that resembles a possible?
Well, the story just came out in the last couple of days about how Trump went out and bought shoes for everybody. Did you see that one? For all the members of his cabinet, they bought these stylish leather shoes, and but he guessed on the sizes of the shoes for everybody in his cabinet, including Rubio and Vice President and everybody else. And you see actual photographs of them sitting in the Roosevelt room with Trump, and you can look down and you can see that the shoes are way oversized that Rubio has on, and so on and so forth. So in the spirit of the cult, they just decided that they were going to wear these shoes in deference to their great leader, and that's just one example of how they feel they're obligated to do whatever he wants.
And of course, you bring out in one of your essays in the book your own involvement in what was a cult.
Yes.
I guess the Lyndon LaRouche.
That was back in the 70s? Yes, it was. And at the time, I go through that whole experience I had with that cult, which is why I feel I've got a certain understanding of what's going on today as a result. That all the trademarks of the cult that I was involved with can be seen all over the rise of the Trump movement and the MAGA people and so on and so forth. And the big question is, how do you deprogram somebody? Dr. Hassan has written a great book, a number of books about cults. A friend of mine, he wrote one called The Cult of Trump, and it was based on his research and his own involvement in a cult back in the 70s, the Moonies, and how he got out. And it's very instructive for our current political environment to try to summon that experience in terms of how you get somebody out of a cult. And you really have to bang at them. It doesn't happen all at once. It's a build-up. It is what we see happening today, little by little. All of a sudden. And in my own experience, I wanted out of that cult before I actually left, and the big question became at a certain point when I knew I wasn't not where I wanted to be, how to make the break, because they do everything in their power to intimidate you and to make you feel like if you were to leave, the whole world would fall apart and that kind of thing. So you have to hammer at that. You have to hammer at the fact that there are alternative policies that do not follow the rule of the cult, do not follow the rule of the cult leader. And of course now in the case of the US, and this touches on my primary theme in the book, Don't Eat Your Children, the scandal around Trump's involvement with underage girls is just now breaking out into the public. And this is going to be, this could really be his undoing. And I think I would not be surprised if he hadn't ordered the bombing of Tehran simply to divert attention away from that expose, which is coming out more and more. Go ahead.
So that gets to a little bit of one of the other themes that goes through a number of your essays in your book. These were all columns in the newspaper, right?
Yes.
But you have talk about radical hedonism that might be to some way linked to Trump and some of his cronies. But you mentioned that at one point, maybe this was in the 70s or 80s, by means of a tsunami of degrading pornographic exploitation in the name of sexual freedom.
Yeah.
And that might hit, as you know, to some in the LGBT community, or at least gay men.
Yes.
Back in the 70s, post-Stonewall, there was a sense of freedom of expression, which also meant a little bit more of a freedom for sexual expression.
Right.
Are you condemning that, or is that a little different?
Well, no, it's a matter of degrees. You take something and you judo it and you turn it into something that's not what was intended originally. And that's what happened with the hedonism of the early 1970s that was promoted so strongly against women, and primarily because of the women's movement and the gains of the women's movement made in the late 60s. And so you saw a huge explosion of, pornography and, sexual, in the name of sexual freedom. And, so it was a move against that, a move against women's liberation. And similarly, a move against gay liberation was and I was directly involved in that because I was a co-founder of the Bay Area chapter of the Gay Liberation Front in 1970. And, I saw it firsthand, I lived it. We had people, I did not know at the time, but this philosopher, Foucault, this famous postmodernist philosopher, was teaching at Berkeley at the same time I was an activist in San Francisco, and he was lecturing, 500 students at a time every day, and then every night he'd go over to the bathhouses in San Francisco, and this was as AIDS was unfolding and breaking out. And he was preaching that there, a radical form of sexual liberation for gay people. And he said that there, for example, the only original act sexual behavior that we have in the modern time is fisting. And so he became, advocated for that kind of thing. And, that taking something that is, what we would say is a rather innocent desire to be free and to be uninhibited, and turning it into something that becomes an obsession, that becomes an addiction, and that's what I witnessed myself personally in the 1970s. And it's associated with this whole cult thing, but the Epstein files is revealing that Trump, I don't know where the Epstein files is going to go, but I would say that given all the photography that was associated with it, you think about why he took so many pictures, why there were so many pictures and films and everything else. It was a massive, blackmail operation. It was a massive operation to catch important people in compromising situations and then asserting control over them. And it was a huge, huge thing. And it's going to take years to really get to the bottom of it, but I think it's bigger than most people realize. And it starts in the 70s. It starts when Donald Trump becomes, and Roy Cohn, his mentor, are the beneficiaries of the hyper-hedonism of the early 70s, and that characterized their behavior and their tastes and everything that got him moved into the 1980s under Epstein, and all of these lurid photographs and videos and everything else that Epstein has. Some of which I think are under control by the FBI now, but I'm not sure how many. Millions of pages, my God.
Of things that went on in his
Yes.
residence.
Yes, and under his influence. Yeah.
And a lot of it talks about, and you go into it a little bit too, about underage girls.
Absolutely.
But are we talking about close to the legal age of consent?
Well,
haven't
I've seen the reports, and I'm sure you have too. And how close to the age of consent is age 10 or 9? I think you're going to find that ultimately that's kind of, because there's no limit. See, Trump has this attitude now. He's the cult leader. There's no limit on what he can do if he wants to, right? And that's the attitude that he was cultivated for him. And so there's no boundaries. Who's to say that you got to stop at a certain age or anything like that? He did not feel the compulsion to do that, to follow any rules whatsoever. So I fear to think, and of course the Iranians, their response to the bombings that are going on is to send out messages over the internet, on social media, just repeating the fact that Trump is a rapist of children. And that's their response to what's happening to them, is to just broadcast this, and they're going to get their hands on some of these tapes and some of this video, and I'm sure they're going to spread it all over the world. Are we still going to do nothing about it in this country? Are these Republicans in Congress going to still do nothing about it but wear their oversized shoes to his cabinet meetings? I don't know. I hope not. But that is the subject of this book. Please don't eat your children.
Absolutely.
Please don't destroy your children.
Now, one of the things that you bring out in the book is ironically that cult that you said you were involved with at one point, the Lyndon LaRouche organization, brought you to Washington to work as a journalist, and that's where I recall now where I first may have met you or seen you, in the White House press room.
Okay, yeah.
Could you tell a little bit about that?
Well, I did a White House press pass, and I was in there every day, and I was, to the unhappiness of my cult leaders, I behaved like a journalist when I was in there, instead of those who had been in there as my predecessors, who would stand up and disrupt and start chanting things, and I didn't do that. I decided I want to behave like an actual journalist in there. And I went to the Reykjavik summit with Reagan. I went to Malta, and I behaved myself, and that did not please my cult leaders whatsoever. So, and it was also a pathway for me to get out.
And that was in the 80s under the Reagan
That was
administration.
late 70s and early 80s, yeah. Yeah, and so I'm glad I was able to do it. It wasn't easy. It took a lot of initiative to break out for me. But I would say to anybody who's in a cult, including anybody who's in the MAGA cult, the Trump cult, it's nice, the water's, come on in, the water's fine. You know, you're led to believe that the whole world revolves around these pronouncements and it's not true. You come out and you discover how invisible these points of view are that you had been espousing, you know, in terms of the real world. And that's one of the things that I hope people will realize as they begin to break away more and more from the Trump cult. But thank you for bringing that up, because cult century is the other feature of the book besides Do Not Eat Your Children, and they're related, of course. Epstein, you know, I referenced Epstein a number of times in the book, things that were disclosed earlier this last year. All these essays are from this last year since Trump's inauguration to a second term. And, you know, I'm putting together a catalog of news essays that have come out since this one came out that are going more and more into what's happening with Trump and this latest bombing of Iran and what some of the consequences of that are likely to be.
Yeah. And one of the things...
I'm uncomfortable sitting in this little high chair here, I have to say.
Okay. One thing I'm wondering if you got a little bit of flack about saying something that is at odds with what is thought to be sacrosanct in this country, and that is football. One of your essays condemned football because of the head injuries.
That's right.
That leads to permanent brain damage of a lot of the players.
And I have a personal friend who's going through that now, suffering from advanced dementia in his 80s, who was a star football player at Stanford University back in the day. And that's compelled me to take this on even more. One of these days, they're going to figure out how to diagnose CTE, chronic traumatic encephalopathy, which is the brain injury disease that takes the lives of so many of these athletes while they're living. Instead of you can't find out if a person suffered from it until after they died. When they find out how to diagnose that among living people, I think there's going to be, football is going to go the direction of boxing in this country, I think. Of course, it's already changed a lot. If you watch football games these days, they don't tackle the way they used to. They hug each other to the ground trying to avoid, you know, the old-fashioned helmet to the kneecap form of tackling is no longer done, and you just grab somebody like a big bear hug and ride them to the ground these days. And so the players are obviously cognizant of the threat and the danger and want to avoid it as much as possible. Yeah, I think we're going to see that that's one of the great legacies of this culture, that when it goes, it's going to reveal a lot about the willingness of people to knowingly cheer on people as they are destroying their brains. And of course, the brain is the one great thing about us, right? Aside from anything else.
Yeah, well, another thing that you go into a little bit, and maybe you could elaborate a little more on how this has influenced you, is your religious background as a young person.
Yeah, well, I did not come from a religious family at all, and my own pilgrimage, you might say, in that was very unique. My parents didn't object, but I took it very seriously as a worldview and so on and so forth. I wanted to go into seminary, graduating with honors, the major in the New Testament, and of course my views on Christianity, Islam, and Judaism as part of the tradition is as a very ecumenical. I characterize myself as an ecumenical Christian, not as a Christian nationalist, which is what all the Trump people are. And so to see the commonality in all the great world religions associated with what defines moral behavior, moral imperatives, you know, as compared to just following what Trump says and doing whatever Trump wants. You're going to stand just for a second. Oh, okay. Thanks.
Okay. And a little related to the religious thing is one of your essays does talk about Pope Francis speaking out possibly in some way, where maybe in a gentle way, challenging our distinguished vice president's interpretation of Catholicism.
Exactly, totally. I mean, J.D. Vance, the vice president, is a latecomer to the so-called Catholicism, and he's got the Christian nationalist view of Catholicism, in which he basically puts country ahead of God in his statement of what the priorities are. And yes, Pope Francis and the current Pope too have been making very strong statements that at the core of the Christian tradition is grounded in helping the underprivileged and the downtrodden. There's no question about it. Anybody wants to read the New Testament, that its focus is the salvation of the downtrodden, the poor, the weak, and not the elevation of the privileged and the rich. And that's the choices we have today. So I invite people to read my book if you want to get my views on the subject. And of course, I have another book out that's called My Faith, My Newspaper, which is another group of essays associated with why the importance of newspapers, why the importance of print. You'll see I have an editorial in this week's edition of the News Press called Why Print. In particular, why having a print tactile newspaper like the Blade and like the Falls Church News Press really matters in our culture, and just switching everything over to being online and digital is not going to cut it for our culture.
And you mentioned that too about your print edition continuing.
Yes.
In your paper. Is that financially feasible though these days?
Well, we're working at it. We're working at it. And I think it's kind of like vinyl records, right? Where they're starting to make a big comeback because people are starting to realize that there's some value to that they missed out on considering before. And I can guarantee you in the last 6 months, or longer even, that the attitudes of the public towards print newspapers and of corporate America towards print newspapers has really changed. From saying, oh, it's a dead industry, it's not going anywhere, to, oh yes, there's a value to it in communities and shaping communities and so on and so forth. And that's what I'm doing and what I intend to continue to do, and hopefully broaden with greater influence.
Yes. Well, that's about the questions I had. Is there anything I didn't ask that you think is?
Oh, you didn't ask my batting average my senior year in college.
Oh,
when
boy.
I was on I don't know. Anybody else in the room here got questions? Welcome. Yes, sir.
President, I have a question for you. So you alluded to it a few minutes ago about Pope Francis being hard on the administration. I think he used the word he used the word disgraceful in terms of what the administration was doing in terms of
Right.
immigration.
Right.
Do you think that's, in terms of someone at that level like the Pope, do you think that's the harshest word that the Pope has used against any type of government administration?
Well, he uses, and Leo too, they take the high road in terms of language. And I think that's something we really need to do more of in our culture. I think the fact that we've taken the low road is the cause of a lot of our problems today. I think that, the internet and social media allowing all of this negativity, half of or more of which coming from bots now, and not even real people, has contributed to our decline as a culture. And so if somebody decides that they want to start elevating language again, respect that has an inherent respect for the listener, for everybody, is a good thing, is one good step towards getting us back on track in the right direction. So I have no problem with that kind of language. Pretty clear what he means.
Yes. Thank you, sir.
What can the average American do to get us out of the rut we're in?
I think one I just alluded to, on one hand, human beings are complicated beings. We're not all good, we're not all bad. We have, a capability of plumbing the depths of depravity, and we have what Lincoln called the higher angels of our nature that we can appeal to, that we can say, look, from the standpoint of certain moral values and certain constitutional values, we need to assert those against depravity and, degenerate impulses that we may even experience. And that's how we get out of it. We take the high road, maybe a glib way of putting it, but I think a good way to start is by asserting the high road. We have an election that we're going to have to fight very hard to make sure actually comes off as a fair election this November. Everybody needs to be doing whatever they can to do that. We here right in Virginia have a referendum in April about recalibrating our congressional districts as a temporary measure to block Trump's efforts to do the same thing in places like Texas and North Carolina. I think I hope voters will vote yes on that so we can counter that. And once this November election is over, we can get back on the right track for, nonpartisan districts and so on and so forth. But in the meantime, we need to do this. We need to stop Trump.